the work that you do for cooking, for preparing and creating something with your hands, it has this interesting side effect of bringing happiness and joy to humans. I really believe this. People I know who cook, they're happy people. And, when they serve you a meal that they've cooked themselves, yeah, they're a little bit tired, but they're smiling and they have that glow of, I did it, I made this.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 148, and my guest is Nevra Ledwon. Again! Yes, Nevra is the cooking professional who we spoke with last week. She runs one of the DC area's largest farm buying clubs, and she teaches cooking classes for all ages. Of course, she runs a tight kitchen. That's why we've invited Nevra back to the show. Last week, she gave us the why behind cooking, and this week, we're going to get a bit more of the how. She literally walks us through a week in the nitty-gritty life of a cook. She teaches us how to use what's on hand, how to prepare varied and interesting meals, and she talks about the benefits of meal planning. I have to be honest with you, usually when people say the words meal planning, my eyes roll back into my head. It sounds super boring, but the truth is, if we're up for making plans for the weekend, why wouldn't we make plans for what we're going to eat? And Nevra shows how it can be fun and nourishing along the way. So let's go for it. It's time to get cooking with Nevra. Now, just a quick thank you to our sponsors before we dive into the conversation. They help keep this podcast going. Vintage Tradition Tallow Balm, the original whole food of skincare. Check out their products, including a new paperboard tube for lips and tallow on the go. Visit vintagetradition.com to check them out. And Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. New Zealand-sourced liver, organ meats, and bone marrow in convenient gelatin capsules. Order yours today at ancestralsupplements.com. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Nevra.
Thank you, Hilda.
We are all so busy nowadays. I know you are flying out of town today. I just got back from a trip. But lots of us are juggling a lot of things. You are a full-time IT professional. You have a young child. You do volunteer work. How do you personally fit cooking into your own schedule?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people ask me that. And I guess I would say that for me, cooking it's important. And I've found that most people I know find the time to do the things that are important to them. And so for me, I might not be going to the gym as much. I'm not shuttling my child to soccer, golf, competitive swimming, etc. Cooking is a really important thing that I do make time for each week. And, okay, maybe it's a little bit easier for me because I do have childcare during working hours. And I do have the benefit that I work at home when I'm not traveling like I am later today and the rest of the week. But, even on days when I am away, I manage to get the cooking done and I'm able to do it, I think mostly thanks to one amazing trick that I mentioned in the last interview, which was the weekly meal plan. And it sounds very simple, but so few people do it. But for me, it just makes all the difference in the world.
Okay, I have to be honest with you. I have never used a meal plan. So talk to me.
Well, I think most people don't. For me, it just became a necessity with everything I want to get done in my life. I struggled until I got the discipline to for me, it's usually Saturday morning, sit down and plan out what the meals are going to be for the rest of the week. And I mean, for me, breakfast doesn't really need planning because it's, for me, the same thing, oatmeal every day. But the dinners, and then usually I make enough dinner so that there's leftover the next day for lunch. Planning that out has just dramatically reduced the stress in my life.
And that sounds so good. Stress relief. We could all use that. So how do we get going with this meal planning thing?
As I've refined my meal planning process, I've found that there's a few considerations in what I think makes up a really good plan. So the first thing is using what you've got, right? So for me, Saturday morning, I usually go to the farmer's market and I begin with what catches my eye. And I come home And then combined with that, before I leave for the market, I look in the fridge. And this takes some discipline, to actually go open the fridge, open the pantry, look at those things that you bought earlier in the week that have been sitting there, and figure out recipes that could use it. And add to that the ingredients that you pick up from, the farmer's market or the store.
Oh my gosh, that is so simple, but so true that that would be helpful. Literally, when I was walking out the door with my husband the other day to go to a farmer's market, I said to him, "Do we have tomatoes? Do we have onions?" Like I had no idea what was in our home, so that when we got to the farmer's market, I didn't really know what I was looking for. So it makes sense to kind of assess our situation.
Well, it's funny because in one prior job, I worked in the warehouse management industry, and there was, inventory management and counting your inventory was something that, all of my clients had to do. And it's a good practice at home too, knowing what you have on hand. What I do is I keep a piece of paper on my kitchen counter, and whenever I get close to emptying something, I immediately write it on that piece of paper. And then when it's time to go to the store, I have my list already made.
Sounds good. So what are some other elements that we need?
So another thing for me is balance and variety. So, in dinner especially, variety is important because, again, I eat the same thing for breakfast every day. So I usually start the meal plan with a placeholder for a soup one night of the week. Usually I do a main dish salad another night. Usually I tend to like Asian food, so I'll throw a curry or a stir fry in there. And then for starches, for me, I developed a gluten intolerance a few years ago. So I try to balance the starches. So maybe I want, some rice in there in the week somewhere. I want some potato. I want something corn-based like a polenta or grits or tortillas. And then some proteins. So it might be fish, it might be lamb, chicken, beef, pork, it might be beans. I have some nights without any meat. But I try to balance all of those things so that in the week I'm not getting tired of eating the same thing over and over again. That kind of ties into the smart sequencing, which is, the order in which you do things. So this is where I say, for instance, if I'm having chicken wings, right, or chicken legs or a whole chicken, when I'm done with dinner, everybody at the table knows you throw your bones into the pot, and everybody helps me remove any uneaten meat from those bones first. And then overnight, I just simmer the bones in water. Very simple. And then the next morning, I strain the broth. And then the next day, a natural choice would be a soup that uses that broth.
Wow, you do make it sound really simple. But I was also just wondering, Nevra, do you put in apple cider vinegar to draw the minerals out of the bones?
Well, so I do try to follow a lot of the Weston A. Price guidelines. I think that there is really good sound science behind it. And I do when I can, but one thing I've come to accept in, sort of my busy life with all of the things I have going on is I am not going to let perfection be the enemy of good. So I will settle for sometimes I don't get the vinegar in there, right?
Mhm.
Or sometimes I don't soak the grains. For me, it's more important to actually prep the meal at home and get it done somehow than to do it totally perfectly.
Well, that really appeals to me, and I think it will to most of us. We all have to make compromises and adjustments depending on our schedule and the busyness of life, and we're all just doing the best we can. All right, so tell us what's next. What other elements are there to meal planning?
So another part of it is once I figure out what the meals are for the week, I sort of, based on what my travel and meeting schedule is, I figure out when different things need to happen. So for instance, I know if I'm going to marinate the chicken wings, then I know that the day before I need to make the marinade and I need to thaw out the chicken. So just by putting the list by day of what some of those tasks are, it's amazing how much you can get done just because you wake up first thing in the morning and you know what's on your list. You're not waiting until 4 or 5 p.m. that day and your stomach is screaming at you, begging for food right now to start thinking about it. And for me, the mornings, and maybe this is just my body, but I have evolved over the years, and I think, motherhood helped this, but my body has evolved to an earlier schedule. So by 8 o'clock, I'm pretty tired, and I am usually totally asleep by 9 o'clock. But I wake up at around 5.
Mm.
And, in the morning, I might not start work till 8. So the morning is a time I can get a ton of food prep done so that in the evening, it's literally, maybe 30 minutes to put everything together.
Fantastic.
And the other thing that I think is important is asking for help. So because I love cooking, and everybody in the household feels like, oh well, they don't want to take that joy away from me. They also know that I do have a lot of other things going on to keep the peace and harmony in the house. I need help. And so, my husband, who honestly, he's not very good in the kitchen. He has this knack for injuring himself. So I give him safe tasks, but if I cook, then he cleans up. And even my 6-year-old, he helps, if it's cutting the ends off the beans, or using the potato peeler. That's his favorite thing, because he gets to handle a sharp cutting object, and I guess little boys like that. So, everybody has a task, and it's manageable because we're talking about, 10 minutes of help per person, and then it all comes together.
I love it. Many hands make light work, is what they say, and it's really true. All right, Nevra, so let's get specific. Walk us through a week of meal planning prep.
Okay, so let me see. I wrote a few down a couple weeks ago, and I'll tell you what my plan was for that week, which I executed on, and it worked really well. So that Saturday morning, I went to the farmer's market as usual after my yoga class, and it's midsummer, so of course I'm seeing a lot of tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. So I bought those and some okra, I think I saw some snow pea shoots, which I really like, and sweet potato. And then before I left, I checked at home, and I saw I had plenty of potatoes, which I always have on hand, avocado, onions, garlic, right? These are staples for our house. And then I always have growing in the garden herbs like parsley, basil, mint, rosemary, etc. So here was my dinner plan. Saturday night, Asian steak salad with snap peas, avocado, tomatoes. And then that evening, I knew I wanted to go ahead and soak some chickpeas overnight. So for me, soaking them, and to improve digestibility, I put a piece of konbu, which is a type of kelp, into the water. You can also put whey, you can put lemon juice, different things to increase the digestibility of those beans. And then Sunday, for lunch, we had sandwiches with some of the leftover steak. I used the gluten-free bread for mine. And then we used the sourdough rye bread for the rest of the family. And then while we were eating lunch, I was just simmering the chickpeas. And when we were done with lunch, I drained those chickpeas, and I made a salad that had sweet potatoes and mint and like this date vinaigrette with some, chopped peppers and parsley. A very nice, refreshing salad that I knew would give me lunch through the week, at least for a couple of days.
Hold on. So I want to back up for a second. So before you left for the farmer's market, did you already have the meals planned out? Because they're already sounding like 5-star specials. You know what I mean? Like this steak salad with pea shoots or whatever you said. Like, I'm just like, that sounds amazing. Tell us how you got from here to there.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a couple of things. First is, I feel like our society, I call it the tapas culture, right? Or the meza, I'm Turkish, so I'd call it the meza culture. We have this expectation nowadays that you can have a variety of, anything we want, any time of year, and 20 different dishes, and, in a single sitting. And I've tried to shift away from that expectation of what am I in the mood for, to what is in season and available right now. And based on that, what are the recipes in my catalog, in my head, that I've perfected over the years that I know use those ingredients. So for me, going to the farm, starting with what I have in the fridge, and then what I see in the farmer's market that looks really good. And by the way, just because it's, August does not necessarily mean, usually it does mean tomatoes, but it could be that there was a bad weather incident or something, and the tomatoes aren't so good this year. So being flexible and adaptable to what is actually available, I think is important for being healthy, and also really enjoying your meals and having meals that are flavorful.
Excellent. So you kind of take your inspiration from what's in season and what's available, it sounds like.
Because I'm planning my meals, and I'm storing the recipes that I find online or in my books. I have a little Word document, and there's probably fancier apps and ways to do this, but I've built up a repository of a lot of recipes that for me, they work for me. And yeah, some of mine seem a little fancy and exotic, just because for me, I love to cook.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have to be this fancy. They don't have to require ingredients from, these exotic Asian markets that have half the ingredients not labeled in English. I just like that experience to go to these ethnic stores. But, very simple food. I'm a strong believer in, 3 to 5 ingredient dishes. It does not have to be fancy to be good and tasty and nourishing.
Okay, I think we've only gotten through Sunday so far. So let's keep going. Never talk to us. I'm really hoping that our listeners will get inspired to try some of these recipes. And actually, speaking of that, I'm hoping that you can put these together, at least a few of them, so we can make them available in our show notes. We can do that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and some of them come from cookbooks, which I'll link to the cookbooks.
Okay,
Like, for instance, Splendid Soups is my favorite soup cookbook. It just has like soups from around the world. And so I'll list some of those.
awesome.
Yeah. So continuing, yeah, I think Sunday night I made like a Szechuan fish dish. And then I served it with steamed rice and some sauteed pea shoots. And then Monday I thawed out some sausage that I get from a farm, and I just pan fried it, and then I served it with simple boiled potatoes with butter on the side, and then zucchini from the garden, which I sauteed the zucchini in the same cast iron skillet that just lives on my stove. It's this old Griswold, decades old, that it never really needs cleaning. And so, you cook the sausage and it gets a little bit of a crust on the bottom, a residue. And then when you saute something wet after that, like a vegetable that releases water, it naturally deglazes and kind of cleans the pan and also adds a lot of flavor to the zucchini. So I did that all in one pan, and then just literally just wiped the pan with a paper towel when I was done, and dinner was served.
Amazing. That's a great little tip right there.
Yeah, and then Tuesday I made a gazpacho, with those nice fresh market tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers, and I used the food processor, which made the chopping easy. You could also do a blender, but I like my gazpachos a little chunky. And
Mm.
then we just served that on the side with I have my gluten-free bread, and the rest of the family had the rye bread. And then Wednesday, it was grilled chicken wings that it was like a lemon garlic marinade that, again, I made early in the morning the day before,
Hmm.
cleaned up, got the chicken in the marinade in the fridge, before work. Then on Wednesday in the evening, I just took it out of the bag, lit the grill, and grilled the chicken wings. And then I think that evening we had a polenta that was literally like one of those quick polentas. It takes 5 minutes with some water, and then I grated some Gruyere cheese to give it some additional flavor.
Nevra, I want to talk to this point about the marinade because I feel like that's one of those places where, for convenience sake, we're likely to grab a marinade or a dressing off a supermarket shelf when it really couldn't be easier to take a few fresh ingredients and put them together to coat our meat or seafood or what have you. Isn't that right?
Yeah, honestly, I think it seems daunting at first until you do it. It's just that there's a few additional steps. I mean, for me, it was squeezing a few lemons and then peeling a few cloves of garlic and throwing it into the little cup where I use the immersion blender, and then pouring in some olive oil, and then adding the secret with chicken, by the way, is you need a lot of salt because the salt pulls the water out of the skin, and that's what gives you the nice crispy chicken skin, by the way. But yeah, you know what, it is a little bit more work to do that, to get those ingredients together and then blend it in the immersion blender, and then you got to wash the blender, which mine just comes apart and goes right in the dishwasher. So yeah, it's a little bit more work, but honestly, a little bit like we talked about in the last episode, the work that you do for cooking, for preparing and creating something with your hands, it has this interesting side effect of bringing happiness and joy to humans. I really believe this. People I know who cook, they're happy people. And, when they serve you a meal that they've cooked themselves, yeah, they're a little bit tired, but they're smiling and they have that glow of, I did it, I made this. And I just think that's so powerful. And they say that, this kind of gratifying work can be very easily becomes habit forming. So you got to get over your fear, give it a try, and I'll bet you'll be pleasantly surprised with the results.
Coming up, Nevra explains the beauty of an imperfect meal, and she walks us through the rest of her cooking week, dropping lots of great tips each step of the way. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors, Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral
Yeah, I
supplements
know what
offer
you're
New
talking
Zealand
about, that
sourced
sliminess
bone
that comes
marrow
with
and
okra.
nose to
Nobody
tail
likes that.
organ meats
Well, I shouldn't
like
say
liver,
nobody likes that.
heart,
I guess
kidney, and
it's
pancreas, all in convenient gelatin capsules. Traditional peoples and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would
that's
strengthen and support
awesome.
the health of the
Okay, but see, you've
corresponding
got our
organ of
mouths
the
watering,
individual.
Nevra, but
In
talk
other
to
words,
those
a
of us who
person with a
still
weak
may be
heart
feeling
was fed the heart of a
uncertain
healthy
about
animal.
how to
A
proceed.
person with urinary ailments would be given kidney from a healthy animal, and so on. Visit ancestralsupplements.com today to see what it can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are committed to helping you and the world eat better. We are advocates for food freedom and international initiatives, helping the world rediscover ancestral ways. Join hands with us now by giving to the foundation with a gift of any size. Just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the donate button. And thank you in advance.
It does not have to be a perfect meal. In fact, I would argue that when you cook for someone and there are mistakes and there are burnt parts and there's things that are not perfect, that you actually foster a stronger connection with that person because you're showing your vulnerability. You're showing that it's okay to be imperfect. And part of what that does is helps that person feel comfortable being themselves around you too, and also being imperfect. And it's just this amazing human thing that happens when we are not perfect. And this is something that I often think about at birthday parties, kids' birthday parties, right? Because most of the time there are these perfect, beautiful, colorful, sparkly cakes, right? That look nothing like anything I could make, right, myself.
Mm.
And then I feel intimidated when it's time to make my own son's birthday cake with, it's lopsided and it just has the cream that doesn't behave as well as the frosting and it isn't very colorful. It might have some berries on it that add color, but it's certainly not sparkly. But I can see the reaction in people, the parents, the looks of amazement, and then the joy when everybody takes a bite of this homemade imperfect cake. I just think it's powerful.
That is powerful. All right, Nevra. So take us through the next few days of the week.
Okay, we're almost done. So since I grilled the chicken wings, and I might have sautéed some spinach or probably more zucchini because I have it coming out of my ears right now from the garden. um, then that night again we threw the chicken bones into a pot with water. I might have added a little vinegar. I might not have. But then on Friday morning, strained it and prepared a soup. And I think that day it might have been a sort of a Thai type soup where I took some coconut milk and I just happen to have some Thai ingredients in my freezer because I make this Thai soup a lot, the famous Tom Kha Gai. But sometimes it's a tortilla soup, sometimes it's a lentil soup, sometimes, oh, there's this one I love. It's this Greek or Turkish lemon egg soup called avgo lemono. All you do is you take an egg yolk and you mix it with some lemon juice and you put some dill, and then you take a little bit of the hot broth, put it into that egg mixture, the egg yolk, and it becomes creamy, and then you pour it into the rest of the broth. And it's like this non-dairy creamy soup that the egg yolk gives that richness. And then you can put pieces of leftover chicken meat from the day before. You can put some rice in there if you want. You can put some carrots, but it's just a wonderful Mediterranean soup.
Wow, it sounds mouthwatering, honestly. I can't wait to get that recipe from you.
Yeah, and then, I think I did an Indian potato and okra dish. Was, okra in the middle of summer is really nice. And I like that dish because it's from one of my favorite Indian cookbooks called Ajanta, which they managed to saute the okra over high heat in the pan so that A, it cooks quickly, but B, there's no sliminess that you might normally associate with okra. And then you get all the spices in there, which, garam masala I use, which is pre-mixed, so it can't be easier. Literally, you throw in just that one spice and you get all sorts of flavor. And even people who claim they don't like okra, love this dish. The Southerners like it. The rest of us, it's an acquired taste. But this one, you don't need to acquire a taste for, I don't think.
Nevra, I have to admit, I'm super inspired by all that you've been telling us, but at the same time, intimidated by how amazing some of these meals seem. Speak to those who may be feeling the same way.
Well, I think ease into it, right? So by no means do I think that somebody who is used to eating out 5 days a week should suddenly cook every day of the week. So take baby steps. If you're eating out 5 days a week, try a week where you're only eating out 3 days a week. And by the way, plan out the restaurants you're going to go to in advance. Don't wait until you're hungry, because you're probably going to make a worse restaurant choice. And then on those other days, plan out some simple meals, right? I mean, look, again, my cooking is fancy because for me, I just get my kicks that way, right? But it doesn't have to be. I have days where I'll take a potato that I boiled on the weekend, right? And sometimes I'll do this. I'll boil a bunch of potatoes on the weekend. Sometimes it's white potatoes, sometimes it's sweet potatoes. And then all I do in the evening is warm it in a pan, maybe with some butter and salt. So that takes 5 minutes, right? To just take the already cooked potato. Okay, maybe 8 minutes if I need to peel the potato, which they're easy to peel once they're cooked. Right? And then, maybe I'll fry an egg. Maybe I'll lay a couple of pieces of salami or a ham. Like there's this nice ham I get from my farm buying club, but obviously you can get ham from wherever. Sometimes I go to this German market, I like German Gourmet, and get like these smoked sardines in a can. I mean, it's easy. It's quick food, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll just cut a few pieces of cheese, and I'll just arrange a few things. Maybe it's a spoonful of sauerkraut that I make, which you could buy too, but I make it maybe once every 3 months, and then it lasts, or it's fermented veggies. So I just make, I kind of call it a hodgepodge. It's like everyone get out their plates and grab these different things, and make a nice mixture on your plate that's filling and nourishing and interesting. And if you plan these in advance to have these easy, quick foods available, maybe it can be pre-hard-boiled eggs, etc., the meals come together very easily. And again, this is very different from restaurant food, right? This is not like in some fancy theme and everything is the proper food of, say, Thailand or a proper common French dish. It's a hodgepodge of different things, but it gives you access to all the different flavors and textures and nutrients to get you satisfied.
Yeah, I guess if we wanted to make it really fancy, we could just write on a chalkboard, farm fresh eggs or sardines imported from Germany or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? I'm being kind of silly, but I guess I'm just trying to say the way it's presented makes a difference.
No, you're absolutely right. I see that in the restaurants, and people go crazy, and they pay a huge premium for these things when it's very accessible and affordable if you buy it direct from the producers or farmers markets, or even Whole Foods. I know people criticize Whole Foods for the prices. I think for the quality they offer, there is some good value, mm-hmm. even in stores like Whole Foods, especially if you're someone that's used to eating out at restaurants.
But you're right, Nevra. We have to kind of get over our perfectionistic tendencies, both those that come from without, that come from society, and those that come from within.
You know what? You're absolutely right, Hilda. Sometimes I feel like we live in a society of perfectionists and extremists. For instance, I almost feel embarrassed to just go for a 15-minute bike ride down the street to pick something up from, in my street clothes, right? I have some friends who they can't ride without putting on their fancy gear, and those fancy clicking shoes, and then they go out with their Garmin watch, and they proudly post the downloaded course map showing the 40-mile ride that they completed. And, not everything needs to be record setting, and Facebook post worthy, right? And I think the same thing applies to cooking. Throwing together a few things that you have on hand to fill your belly and give you some nourishment and satisfaction, that's impressive enough. And so what if it's not magazine worthy or Instagram post worthy, right? It's going to make you happy and healthy, and that's what really matters.
Well, those are powerful words, and I want to ask you now, if the listener could do one thing, we usually say to improve their health, but in this case, Nevra, let me say, if the listener could do one thing to get cooking, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, on your last episode, I mentioned meal planning, so let me come up with something different. I would say, get over your fear, take a risk, and try to cook something that you love, and don't be afraid of mistakes. Just dive in and just do it.
Well, that's great advice, Nevra. And if you all decide to go for it and make some of these recipes that she's recommended, go ahead and let us know by social media. Either post them on Instagram and use the hashtag WAPF, or tweet the picture to us at Weston A. Price. Do whatever you can just to let us know you took this advice, and I know Nevra will be encouraged, and we will be as well. So thanks for this time today, Nevra. It really has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Hilda.
My guest today was Nevra Ledwon. For more on Nevra, visit her blog, churnyourown.com. For today's show notes and resources we mentioned, including at least 4 recipes that Nevra recommends, go to our website, westinaprice.org, go to the podcast page, and look for the show notes for episode 148. Oh, and on that same podcast page, by the way, you'll see a link to the listener survey. That's for you. Please fill it out for us. It'll just take a second, I promise, and it would help us serve you better. Thank you so much. Also, remember to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We are closing in on 300 reviews. Help us get there, and thank you. Next week, everybody, we're going to hear from Dr. Tom Cowan on his latest book. In our conversation, he suggests that vaccinations are effective indeed for reducing the incidences of short-term disease. But this short-term relief comes at a cost in terms of our long-term health. Basically, what Dr. Cowan says is that allowing our bodies to experience sickness in the short run is better for our immune systems in the long run. It's a fascinating conversation. You're definitely going to want to listen to it as it sheds light on a familiar topic with a fresh take. Finally, a quick thank you to our faithful team of podcast interns. Post-production assistants include Cynthia Castro-Cohen-Enriquez, Deirdre Beard, Diva Rizvi, Melanie Ahern, and Ari O'Hara. Cheryl Huftelin helps with social media. Mary Hine, Olga de Villiers, and Joy de los Santos boost sponsorship and help with special projects. Our listening team includes Heather Carpentier and Victor Coseto, and Amy Matias helps with transcriptions. Hey, and let's just keep in touch, everybody. You can find me on Instagram at holistic_Hilda. Follow me for health tips, podcast stuff, and behind the scenes on this show and on me. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.